The Standard Deviations podcast is a weekly production that looks at money, mind, and meaning, all through a psychological lens. Each week, psychologist and New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest, experts in everything from finance to literature to wellness.
I'm joined today by my two good friends from across the pond in the US, one in Georgia. Correct, Daniel?
Come on, Neil. Yes, Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. and one in Chicago, Brian Portnoy. Brian runs Shaping Wealth, and Daniel is the Chief Behavioral Officer for Brinker Capital. We've known each other for a long time now. I've spent time with the pair of you in London, walking around London, sitting and drinking coffee in London. And it's nice to catch up with you both for a quick chat about what's going on and maybe just fire some particular questions at you both. Are you both up for this?
Yeah, ready. And nice to see you, Neil. Nice to see you.
Thank you. It's always nice to see you both. Listen, let me tell you why this conversation popped into my head. So I was reading a post, Daniel, that you put on social media a week back, I think now. And I've got it printed out in front of me so I remember exactly what you said. But it kind of triggered a thought in me. I wanted to ask you more, and I didn't want to just ask this on LinkedIn and it get lost in the long comments box below. So I thought I'd ask you like this and get you to explain. So your post on social media was around the 5 tips for overcoming fear, given what's going on in the world, the wacky world that we're currently in. And one of the tips that you put out there was to face your fears. And it kind of got me thinking that if you translate that to the world of investing, particularly, I get that that's a niche in this conversation. But if you just look at the world of investing, and then you assume that somebody has a real sense of loss aversion kind of coursing through their veins, they are genuinely fearful about losing money and investing in the stock market. How do people like that go about confronting their fear when that fear may be so deep rooted and built in things that they may have experienced in life that it's a difficult thing for them to do? So that's the question I wanted to ask you on social media, except now I'm asking you face to face. How do you confront that fear?
Well, it's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it here instead of the cesspool that is the LinkedIn comments section. So, so I think, like many things in psychology and like many things in investment psychology, it's paradoxical, right? So first we have to understand that it works. So if you look at how you cure simple phobias or simple fears, over 90% of simple phobias are cured by gradual exposure. So I think intuitively, if people are scared of something, they want to avoid it. But the paradox about avoiding something is that by avoiding it, we're actually feeding it. We're giving it more power because there's a loop between our mind and our body, between our behaviors and our cognition. And so every time we avoid that fearful stimulus, we are in a very real sense, making it more powerful. So when you talk about exposure, it's always gradual exposure. And a lot of good behavior change, is built off this idea from physics that an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and that an object at rest tends to stay at rest. So when someone is overcoming a fear of spiders, right, they don't just throw a tarantula on them and tell them to figure it out. You would first sort of imagine what it might be like to be in a room with a spider, and then you might talk about a spider, and then you might hold a toy spider, and then you might go to the zoo and see a spider. You sort of build up to it, and I think we can take that and apply it to the fears we're facing now, whether they be about our health or our wealth. There's a couple of other things from that piece that I think are worth remembering too, because it's certainly easier said than done to just face your fears. But I think that there's ways that we can make it meaningful. If you look at what's going on with coronavirus, a lot of the things, the world has changed so fundamentally that, you look at now something like going and getting takeout to help small restaurant owners is like this heroic, meaningful act. And before, 6 weeks ago, going and getting takeout wasn't especially heroic. So, being able to couch facing those fears in meaningful terms is powerful. And I think faking it's also powerful. The old saying from the 12-step programs, to fake it till you make it, is actually rooted in behavioral science, because we know that there's this interplay between behavior and cognition. And so just as surely as a thought can produce a behavior can alter a thought. And so if you can't bring yourself to be brave, you can at least pretend until such time as you're able to be brave. So I think that, by making it meaningful, by faking it if we have to, and by just understanding that it works, and we can sort of tiptoe into facing the things that we're fearful of, I think these are all powerful tips for getting started. And there's plenty to be afraid of right now. So this could be applied holistically. And I think these are just a couple of tips to get started.
I was saying to someone the other day exactly that on a call. I was saying, that if the only thing that we had to deal with at the moment was kind of the fact that the market is volatile, then we could probably compartmentalize that and deal with that. But when the markets are volatile and we're on a lockdown and our children are at home 24/7, our partners are at home 24/7, and we can't just get in our car and drive where we want, when we want. Each of those carries their own emotional baggage, if I can use that phrase, that we have to deal with. So it's not just this one thing. We've been dumped a ton of emotionally charged events to kind of to deal with at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's uniquely difficult for the very reason you mentioned. People are scared of their health, they're scared about their wealth, and they're scared about, an uncertain future. And so I think there's plenty to be scared of right now. But I think hopefully some of the things we can cover in this conversation will get people moving in a good direction, because I think there's lots of reason to be optimistic as well.
Yeah. Brian, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Daniel's insights, I think, are spot on. I mean, this is just an opportunity to confront what we fear. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that, none of us have ever had this opportunity to sort of put life on pause. And that itself is an opportunity to reflect on some of these things. So, to Daniel's point about the relationship between behavior and cognition, if you can sort of think through that and accept that, this is an opportunity for us to tackle some of the things that we might have otherwise said, well, we didn't have time for.
Yeah. And actually, so to that point, Brian, and I know you've written a lot over the years about, in relation to advisors and clients, advisors communicating with clients, especially around their investments. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's the kind of the main thrust of shaping wealth. How do advisors even go about communicating with clients in times like this, when, as I've just alluded to, they're dealing with market volatility, lockdown, health, wealth, all of these triggers are being thrown at them. How does an advisor go about communicating that in a meaningful way so that customers, to go back to Daniel's point, clients can actually get on this journey and start down the right road? Yeah,
I think one of the ways to, the word that we should start with is segmentation, meaning that the one size fits all email blast from an advisor to his or her client saying, hey, here's what's going on in the world, and markets are going up and down, and this is what I think. That has limited use. I think it has limited use in general, but especially during this sort of time, I think it's really important for advisors to think through, okay, which types of clients we need, which sorts of help. And my experience with advisors is that they have an intuitive sense of who needs to speak more frequently, who needs their hand held, versus those that do not really want to be bothered, that they're fine, they're on top of things emotionally, intellectually, financially. So segmentation is where it starts, and then the question is, well, what's the content? Like, what do you fill up the conversation with? And there's multiple levels, and the three of us have all in our own way written about this at some length. There is the bigger picture consideration of, okay, this is an opportunity to think about what's most important to you. So we can think about values, we can think about what's really meaningful, but precisely because, as Daniel alluded to before, we don't really have the opportunity to go anywhere to buy much of anything except online. We can, kind of transcend through the day-to-day of money life and say, well, what's really important in terms of my finances? At a more granular level, if we think about money life in all of its dimensions, so saving, spending, investing, insuring, charitable giving, all relatively distinct activities, all relatively distinct from a psychological point of view, I think it's an awesome time for advisors, per those segments that they've set up, to kind of dive in and make it a teaching moment in terms of, okay, this is an opportunity, for example, on saving and spending to see, do we really have a budget in place? Where is our money going? And there are cool, there's fintech and apps and software behind that, but there's also a sheet of paper and a pencil where you can just begin to enumerate, okay, this is a time when not much money is going out. I can take a pause and really see where the flow is and create kind of a 2-level budget, which is sort of your lockdown budget, which gives you a sense of what you really need, and then your normal budget, which can, sort of indulge the things that make your life a little bit more fun on a day-to-day basis.
I love the idea of just keeping a track of everything that's going on, and also one of the things that I'm hearing from the UK advisors is a concern about them bombarding clients with information. So it's not necessarily what information do they send out, it's the quantity of that. And I guess there's a sub question to that then to you, Brian, or maybe Daniel. Do you think that during times of uncertainty and unrest like we're experiencing now, that actually there is such a thing as too much communication?
Personally, I do. It's not like people aren't home now 24/7 watching the news, looking through Facebook or Twitter or other forms of social media, and just feeling completely overwhelmed by that. So financial advisors sending communications more than once a week to say, hey, it's really bad. We have a global pandemic and the market's going up and down. I think that is, probably overkill. And then the second thing I'd add, and, be curious to get Daniel's view on this, is financial advisors drawing some boundaries around where they are as quote unquote market experts. Okay, so, the price of oil is volatile. Equity markets are volatile. Things are all over the place and everybody has an opinion. We've all gone from, being, sort of closet epidemiologists to closet commodity traders to whatever the future is going to bring next. I think advisors need to make some actually really relatively hard decisions about whether they want to put themselves out as somebody who understands what's going on in the market and can predict, which I don't think is a great idea, versus someone who can just sort of take in the information and turn out some good advice as a result. Daniel, what do you?
Yeah, so I think that clients look to advisors at times like these to know how to respond. And more than the specific content that you're sending them, I think the tenor and the frequency of that content is giving them sort of implicit subtext about how freaked out you are. And so if you are constantly updating and constantly rehashing with these sort of canned recaps of what happened in the market, which everyone knows very well. Like everyone heard about oil yesterday. It was crazy, right? It was everywhere. Your clients don't need a recap of how volatile the oil market is right now. So I think you have to be aware that just as much as the specifics of your content, you're communicating about the health and safety of your clients and their portfolios by the frequency and the tenor of your communication. During this time, I've been creating lots of content broadly in two buckets, some of it sort of market content and some of it personal content, just hope and optimism and inspiration. And I'll tell you, we've gotten 10-to-1 uptake on the non-market hope and optimism type pieces that we've been producing. Both are important, but people can get one anywhere, and the other is a little harder to find. So, Brian, you're an expert in financial wellness. And I think about this great pause that we're all in right now. And I read an article recently that I shared with my family, which effectively said this great pause is an opportunity for us as individuals and families to sit down, examine the things that we value, and decide what we want to bring back. Once everything is opened back up again, some things are not worth bringing back, perhaps. So what do you think this great pause will do to change human behavior on a go-forward basis, or will it do much at all?
So it's a great question, and I've mixed feelings about it, Daniel. I mean, my gut reaction, my gut answer, to the, will this change? Will this episode change our relationship to money? My gut answer is no. We've been in tens of thousands of years of the development of the human psyche, and the way that we deal with money is somewhat hardwired into us. I mean, the two of you have also written extensively about this topic, but that fear and greed and envy cycle that we all go through, well, that's there for a reason. There are survival instincts that are built into that. So in the big picture, it's hard to imagine that the way that we struggle with attaching those emotions to our relationship with money are going to change. And so a lot of the ideas in the field of financial wellness on that level are not going to change. The flip side, and you alluded to this, is that the great pause is an opportunity. And so we're not going to adapt as a species or evolve as a species in 2 months' time, but we can, as sentient beings, make some decisions to do things a little bit differently. And so this is an opportunity for us to ask, what's really important to us? We know our connection to others. We know that sense of control over our lives. That belief in something bigger than ourselves, the importance of work as a source of identity, all these deeper forms of meaning that course through us. This great pause gives us really nothing but time and opportunity to think about, okay, if that's what's important to me and that's the way I want to direct my money life, then I can on the margins do a little bit. So I think sort of the deep fundamental evolutionary roots, no way that has changed. The stuff that we all write about is more or less fixed, and it's not going to go anywhere. And those issues are going to be around long after we're all gone. But you can't bypass this opportunity to take advantage of that. We should try to do that both with ourselves and inside our families, but also with our financial advisors.
Yeah, so I forget who said it. I feel like it was maybe Jeremy Grantham talking about lessons learned from the great financial crisis. And he was asked, what will people learn from this period? And he said, in the short term, a lot, in the medium term, a little, and in the long term, basically nothing. Right. And I think that's the worry here. And what I'm hearing from you is that nothing will change unless we're intentional about it. Nothing will change unless we take this opportunity. It's not like the event itself, as big and important as it is going to fundamentally rewire the way that we think about money. But I think if we allow ourselves to be changed by it, it's a great big opportunity. So that's kind of what I'm hearing. Does that sound right? Yeah,
I hadn't heard that Grantham quote, and he's got some great ones. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's not unlike this notion of hedonic adaptation, which is that we sort of get used to everything. We have initial shocks or reactions to something that comes into our life, and things do change, but then we become used to it, and we maybe forget the lessons that we initially learned.
Yeah, perfect. So Neil, you are the co-founder of a behavioral analytics software company that helps investors make good decisions at times like these. Brian talked about the power of technology at a time like this, also said that there's a lot of power in just conversation and pencil and paper. So Neil, what do you see as being the role of technology in helping clients and advisors at a time like this?
Another great question. I've long been a fan and a proponent of not kind of technology not taking over. So I'm not a big fan of robo services, for example, where the tech just does everything. But I'm a huge fan and a big proponent of technology augmenting the advice process. Because I think there's one thing that technology will never replace, and this is just a hypothesis on my part. I don't think it will ever be able to replace that human-to-human connection that we have. The subtle cues that we pick up in conversations with another person, when you just intuitively know that they're not all right, or that they're worried, or they're anxious, or they're thinking about something. I don't think technology can ever replace that. But when you use technology to augment that, and to add depth and color to that, then I think technology has a significant role in helping people make better decisions, especially times like now when there is a ton of noise that they have to deal with, and they have to cut through to try and get any substance out of the decisions that they're making. So I think one of the biggest benefits of using technology in kind of times of crisis and in the advice process is that it can get to the root cause a lot quicker and in a much easier black and white way than perhaps a human can. So, for example, a human can say to another human, in this situation, what would you do? And the human will reply with their response, and that's fine. We could take that as given. We could put that on the fact find, and that could form part of the advice. But actually, if you give them a process whereby the way that they interact with the tech in this example is kind of through an ambiguous set of questions where they can't model in their head what the advisor is trying to get at, but actually it's revealing unconscious thoughts and unconscious behaviors about that person, then what you get the tech to do is lay out in black and white, so to speak, the person who the advisor is sitting in front of. And if they use that kind of, this is the truth, this is who the person really is, and they augment that with everything that they know about them from the human perspective, then those two things combined, I think, create a really powerful set of tools. And I use the human in that sense as well. So I think tech has a significant role to play, not only now, but going forward, more so, especially in the advice process, to help the advisor and to help the client arrive at a place that is right for both of them. Does that make sense? No,
it makes a ton of sense. I love this idea of letting it augment, and I've heard this called a Centaur approach, right? Like part man, part machine, as it were. Tell me this: you were touching on what a psychologist would call socially desirable responding, right? So when you ask people on a risk tolerance questionnaire or even a behavioral questionnaire, how would you respond if XYZ thing happened? How can technology get at what might happen in a crisis type situation when in many ways what we're dealing with now feels a little bit unprecedented? What's the role of technology in cutting through that socially desirable responding and getting to a good response that is more reflective of how people actually behave?
The easiest way, and without kind of talking too much about what we do, it's about kind of giving people the ability to see what a future event may look like. For example, so if I said to you or to Brian, what would you do if the market fell by 10%, as an example? You can give me either the answer that you believe to be true of how you think you will genuinely will react, or you can give me an answer that you think I want to hear as your advisor. Right? They are two different things. You could say, Neil wants me to say this, therefore I'll say that, but you could actually respond with what you believe to be true to you. If we use technology in a clever way, what you can do is you can create a game, a scenario that says, I'm not going to ask you what you think you'll do. I'm actually going to allow you to play out a scenario where you are going to have to make that choice in front of me. And I'm going to see how you model what you are presented with and the outcomes of that model. So for example, most risk questionnaires ask people to predict what they would do. And I think that's one of the Achilles heels of that approach, by the way. Whereas if you played out a scenario with somebody and you said to them, just play this game, and it's not framed in any particular way, so they can't think, oh, what's he trying to ask me here? They can't do that. What you end up getting is a much more real and meaningful answer to the questions that we're asking them without asking them to try and predict. When you put that together with everything else, then you get much richer and deeper insight. And I think that is actually the way that advisors need to move forward.
I think one of the reasons why we've bonded over this shared belief in gamification is because if you have people in sort of thinking mode, right, they give answers that are reflective of what they think, but in sort of a self-glorifying way, or what they think their advisor wants them to hear. But the more immersive you can make the game, I think the more accurate the responses are. Because one of the things about a crisis of this magnitude is that we are all immersed in it, right? We are not moving through our days in sort of a dispassionate, sterile, prefrontal cortex first way right now. We're moving through the world in a very, very immersed, down and dirty way. So I think the more down and dirty, if you will, allow sort of an inarticulate term there, the more down and dirty the simulation can be, the better read we're going to get on how they're going to really act. So I'm in total agreement there.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Daniel. And one of the other points I'd make on this is, one of the things that I've learned over the years of working with clients, and especially trying to deliver behavioral insight, is that one thing we can take as a given is that humans hate complexity. So when you stick in front of a client a piece of paper and you say, there's 35 questions around risk, I need you to fill in with a pen. They read question 1 and they go, God, what does that really mean? What are they actually asking me here? And we create through design, it would seem, a process that is full of complexity, is full of jargon, is full of words people don't understand, asks questions that they can't model in their heads, therefore they give it a best guess. And for me, you might as well rip that paper up and throw it in the bin because it becomes worthless. Whereas if you can engage people in short, punchy, tests or games or using gamification, it's easier for them to model in their head. They don't need to kind of have this cognitive overload of trying to figure out what we're trying to ask them. And then we interpret their responses. We shouldn't be asking them to try and do the interpretation. We should be taking the data and interpreting it in the way that is beneficial for the client and allows us to deliver the services that we need to deliver. So for me, gamification is the only way to do that.
I think it's such a good point. What's the most typical question on a risk questionnaire? It has to do with market volatility and how would you feel if the market went down X and your portfolio went down to X. But we know that, okay, you have $1 million portfolio and the questionnaire says, well, how would you feel if it went down 10%? And 10% doesn't sound like a lot. And then in the real world, your advisor comes to you and says, oh, you just lost $100,000. How does that feel? Well, it feels terrible. It might be, quote unquote, only 10. But it's a real amount of money that has real consequences for the decisions that you're going to make and for the life that you want to live. And so I think the risk questionnaire route, which is central to the way so much of the industry is run, might create more problems than it solves.
It's the one question, Brian, which is similar to that question is what would you do is the one I've seen in the UK is what would you do if your investment fell by 10%? And nowhere on the answers to that question is the option for a client to tick, I have no idea. Mm-hmm. Because if we're being honest, that is the answer that most clients should tick, because they have no idea what they do until they are faced with all of the emotion and the fact that this is real now. Today, I have lost this amount of money. What am I going to do? Until they have all that stimuli running through their brain, how on earth do they know what they're going to do? And therefore, why are we asking them to predict what they're going to do? It kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of neither good to man nor beast, that type of question.
Right. I mean, one of the things that your answer triggers in me is kind of revisiting the topic of information and the type of processing that people do, especially in a time like this, when they're getting so much about not just wealth, but health and general security. We are overwhelmed by information. We've never had more information, more data, more choice than any point before in recorded human history. And that influences the way that we feel about ourselves, let alone how we're going to answer risk questionnaires, which may or may not be relevant to anything. I might turn it to Daniel first, because you've written a series of wonderful books on behavioral finance in the field of behavioral science that directly discusses our information diet and the best way to set that up and how to be intentional about it. I mean, there's no getting around the fact that we want to know what's going on, especially during times of crisis. We very much need to know. Where is that line between needing to know and feeling so overwhelmed and anxious about how much information we're consuming? Like, what advice would you give to individuals as well as to financial advisors on how to moderate that?
So I think you set it up in a really excellent way, because I think that is the pivotal question to ask. Like, is this, is the marginal piece of information moving me forward, helping me make better decisions, and making me happier, healthier, and more secure? So I think after we watch the news, I mean, it may seem a little corny, like after we read an article or after we watch the news, we should ask ourselves, just as a quick heuristic, am I better for this? Am I better prepared? Am I more knowledgeable? And I think a lot of times, pretty quickly, the answer becomes no, right? I mean, I think pretty quickly we have all the information that we need to adequately protect ourselves and our families and our portfolios. And it becomes sort of an information gathering exercise for its own sake. So I encourage people to do a couple of things. And I think this is more important now than ever. The first thing is to evaluate the source. So without going into it in too much specificity, you have seen a lot of bad sources, right? People are scrambling for a narrative. They're scrambling for anything. I recently saw someone on TV touting a purportedly path-breaking new drug that was to be a therapeutic for COVID-19. The person's approach seemed a little bit too cocksure to me. It didn't seem like the kind of tentative, well-reasoned argument I've come to expect from medical professionals. This person was holding themselves out as Stanford affiliated. Stanford denied that affiliation. I did a little digging into this person's credentials. They were a lawyer and not a doctor. And they're on TV opining about what medications we should and shouldn't take to treat coronavirus. And it's like, we shouldn't have to vet at this level. You would hope we would expect more of our news organizations. It's not always the case. So first thing I do, evaluate the source. Is it a reliable source? Next thing I would recommend is that people question sort of the tone and the melodrama. Like good investing, good science is very boring, right? It's very measured. It's very boring. It's very tentative. Neil talked about there's no I don't know check mark on a risk tolerance questionnaire. And when you listen to the doctors, right, when you look at the press briefings, the doctors are boring. They're tentative. They're hedging. And the politicians and the newscasters are the ones that are, leading with bombast and melodrama. And so I think we really need to question sort of anything that smacks of being overly dramatic or having a questionable tone. I think it's also important to consider motive, right? Sort of the final thing is to consider motive. News outlets, financial news outlets, cable news outlets are not in this business for you to make great portfolio decisions. They're not in this business for you to reach your financial goals. They're in business to sell advertising, ultimately. And so what can be very bad news for humanity can be very good news for news outlets. And so I think you always have to understand how the sausage gets made and how the people that you're listening to get compensated. So I think if you evaluate the source, you understand the motives, and you sort of question the tone, I think you'll be on your way to separating wheat from chaff when it comes to finding good reliable news sources.
Yeah, those are, I mean, it's just very sound advice. And the one thing I might add, just hearkening back to my kind of research and academic days, is to enter information consumption mode with a question or a hypothesis. So if you just turn on the TV or start scrolling through Twitter or Facebook, and you're just sort of wide open, hey, what's going on? There's nothing wrong with that, but you're going to be very easily influenced. If you go into any sort of information processing exercise with a question in mind or something that you want to figure out, you're immediately teeing yourself up to say, oh, that's helpful, not helpful, relevant, not relevant. And you can go down certain paths and say, oh, well, that's part of the answer, but not the whole answer. I'm going to go find other sources that give me ultimately a bigger and more balanced picture. I just looping Neil back into this with the information that we consume, the way from a cognitive perspective we're processing things. I know, going back many years, you've given close study to the mind-body connection. So maybe just by way of wrapping up the conversation, like, how do you take all of these cognitive processes and then connect them to the fact that at the end of the day, this is a physiological exercise, that our bodies are physiological systems, and that there's a lot of non-optional subconscious emotion and feeling that comes through what we want to believe are reasonable, logical, and rational exercises?
I use a very simple phrase, Brian, to answer this question, and it's the phrase of know thyself. I think going through a process of self-awareness is, everybody should go through a process of self-awareness and figuring out where when an emotion is triggered, trying to figure out why it was triggered. Is this deep rooted? And this is kind of cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, right? But it's, is the trigger deep rooted and based on an experience that happened to me in the past, or is it something else? And we can sit and guess for a month of Sundays, or we can try and figure out what is driving our emotional states. And of course, our behavioral biases play out in the same landscape here, so figuring out which biases are getting triggered and why they're getting triggered allows us an insight into who we really are. And of course, this mind-body connection thing has been my fascination for a long time, and how, what goes on in our head has a significant impact on our physiology, on our physical state. So anything we can do, anything we can learn about ourselves that allows our psychology to function in a cleaner way, that has a benefit on our overall well-being, can only ever be beneficial to us. And I'm not talking specifically about financial well-being. I'm talking about well-being in general. If we can stop or recognize what's triggering fears and anxieties and prevent our sympathetic nervous system from being triggered, for example, and then our parasympathetic nervous system trying to slow it down, the fewer times that can happen, the stronger and fitter and healthier we become, both in mind and body. So having a self-awareness of who you are and what makes you tick is a great start, I think. And as the psychologist in the room, I don't know whether Daniel wants to add anything to that.
No, if I had one tip that I think is the most powerful and the most commonly overlooked, I would say look after your physical health and your physical wellness. One of the things that I have been doing just to cling to the last vestiges of sanity during this time is to just walk and walk and walk, like just to spend time outside, to spend time getting exercise. I mean, that has done more to drive good decision making in me than any number of sort of mental tricks and reading books and self-reflection. I think putting your body in a state where your mind can do what it knows it ought to do is vastly overlooked. It's seen as peripheral, right? Like physical fitness, physical wellness are often seen as peripheral to certainly good investment decision making, and also just wellness. And I think it's one of the most powerful and overlooked things we can do.
I agree. Listen, guys, I mean, I think you'll feel the same. I could talk for hours. There's a million and one other sub questions that we could go on, but time is pressing us, and I know that we have other things to crack on with. So I found this really useful, and I just want to thank you both for taking your time out to have this conversation with me. Like I said, we could keep going on and push this out to people, and people could learn more and more and more, but we'll draw this one to a close. Any parting words from either of you?
I'm just so excited to know that you're the one who came up with the phrase "know thyself." I thought it was a little bit older and a little bit Greek, but hey, I guess it stems from a wise young man on the Isle of Wight. So congratulations on coining that phrase.
Thank you. I'm trying my hardest to trademark it, but there's difficulty. Yeah, slowly.
That's very American of you to take something that's not yours and pass it off as your own. We'll make you one of us yet.
I'm trying to. Listen, guys, thank you very much. Love talking to you both. Lovely to see you both again. And hopefully catch up with you both soon. And until then, stay safe.
All right. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.